Hello, welcome to a super casual reading vlog. I have absolutely no concrete reading plans this week, but I have the audacity to just film and see what happens. So, what am I currently reading to kick things off here? Weirdly enough, I'm reading something that's like not entirely on brand. I'm reading a book that I have owned physically since it came out, and I actually went to a release event for this book and got it signed by the author, and have since thought about unhauling it many, many times since because I wasn't sure if it was something I'd actually be interested in reading. But it just so happened that one of my friends also wanted to read this book this month, and I was like, you know what? I still have it. I'm still somewhat intrigued. Let's just do it. I won't keep you in suspense any longer, but that book is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. You know what I think is a very weird part of why I haven't picked this book up at all in the last 4 years since it came out? I think it's because it's signed to my dead name. It's signed to a name that's not even street legal at this point. And that's something I think a lot of cis people just can't understand. Like, it wasn't about the book itself. Like, yes, I did need the hype to die down. I did need the capital D discourse to die down. But that part of it, like knowing that my dead name is like scrawled in here in permanent marker, just created distance between me and this book that I have not been able to bridge up until this point. So that's a weird, specific trans experience and a fun way to kick this vlog off, I guess. But we're just keeping things string of consciousness. So what is Ninth House about? Great question. I kind of went into this book with a clean slate. Like, the only thing I knew was that it's Leigh Bardugo's adult debut, it's set at Yale University, and that it's about like secret magical societies. That was it. It's about a girl named Alex who comes from a pretty troubled past. She was in pretty deep with things like selling drugs and using drugs from a very young age. And in fact, one night after she overdoses with some friends, she wakes up to find out that she's the only survivor of a brutal, horrible homicide. And when she wakes up in the hospital, she's basically scouted by the administration of Yale, who've like looked into her background, and they found that she has this weird ability to see ghosts, also known as greys. So the idea is that Yale has these 8 hidden magical societies on campus that regular people don't know about. And there's a 9th one, hence Ninth House, that is known as Leith. And their job is basically to secure the whole thing, monitor all the other houses, make sure they don't use any forbidden magic or go out of bounds, go overboard, get themselves into trouble, anything like that. So that's basically the gist. Like, there's this main character who has these mysterious powers that no one quite understands, and she's recruited into Yale University under very secretive conditions to become part of Leith House and patrol these other magical houses. And also, when the story starts, there is an innocent girl who is murdered, and there is some suspicion that this might be linked to one of the houses, or maybe more of the houses than just one, really. It's basically dark academia, magical murder mystery type of story, and I have to admit, so far it's pretty interesting. At this exact moment, I am precisely 322 pages in, and there's 450 pages total, not including like the houses index and the acknowledgments and all that kind of stuff. So I'm pretty far into it at this point, just a little bit over 100 pages away from the end. I would say a little bit away from being in that final stretch, which is a weird place to start a reading vlog. But like I said, we're just doing whatever at this point. How do I feel about Ninth House so far? This is a complicated question. On a base level, I would say I'm definitely enjoying this. It's been a second since I've read something that's dark academia, so it's been nice getting back into those dark, sort of sinister vibes. I like this whole idea of underground magical societies. It's very appealing. I like the way that's playing out in the story. It's very satisfying to learn more and more about these different societies and the kind of magics and occult activities that they specialize in. I also like how there's a murder mystery element sort of driving the story as well, because I think just having these underground magical societies wouldn't be interesting enough as is. So that gives it a little bit of a push. And I'm really enjoying seeing how that's unraveling as the story progresses. But I think what's so satisfying about that specifically is that the mysteries are like nested in each other. It's a mystery within a mystery within a mystery. There's the question of Alex's past. You know, what magic abilities does she have? How does that work? And what is the truth behind this gruesome murder scene she awoke into? Then there's her relationship with her mentor, who she calls Darlington. From the very beginning of the story, we know that something mysterious happened to him, but we don't quite know what. And then, of course, the actual murder mystery with this innocent girl. What was her involvement? Was she involved with the societies? What really happened? Who wanted to kill her and why? And what's the bigger picture on that? So I appreciate the interplay between all of those things. I also like how the story is told. We're going from like what's currently happening to what happened the previous fall. And I like how those two narratives are slowly folding together. That said, this is not a perfect book. There are certainly things about it that I could do without, and probably top of the list is the fact that there's these occasional throwaway lines that are just incredibly problematic and do absolutely nothing for the story that I wish were just in the garbage where they belong. I can't think of a bunch of examples off the top of my head because I'm just so tired and my recollection is shot. But for example, there's a part where Alex is talking about how she's mixed race, which I did not know going into this story, but her mom is white and her dad is some kind of Latina, but she's not sure what ethnicity he is because she doesn't have a relationship with him, which is totally fine. But in explaining that to the reader, she's like, maybe he was Guatemalan, maybe he was Puerto Rican, maybe he was Dominican. And it's like, okay, that's fine that you don't know what his exact ethnicity was because you don't have a relationship with this person. But all of those things you just listed are different things. They're not interchangeable. There's another part where Alex is in one of these society houses and she notices this Egyptian casket, possibly corpse or some other sacred artifact. And she just casually thinks like, yeah, 1 year, they just brought it over from Egypt. Okay, I guess we're just not going to talk about that heinous colonial activity that you absolutely should not do. It's so hard to explain on even the best of days, and this is not my best day, but it's basically that phenomenon where a white author especially will be writing something and they'll throw in this sentence and they'll be like, oh yes, this is edgy, this is shocking, this is me being a brave author who's strong enough to show gritty realism and how messed up the world is and how messed up people are. And I'm just going to let that sit on the page. And they think they're doing something, but really they're just white people perpetuating whiteness. I don't know if I'm making any sense right now, but I hope my point is getting across. Also, while I'm fully invested in what they're doing for the story narratively, I'm not completely sold on the main characters, which seem to be Alex and Darlington at this point. We're supposed to feel empathy for them because they come from these tragic childhoods. They've had these traumatic experiences growing up, and all of that is valid. All of that is fine and well. But at the end of the day, they're at Yale University on a full ride, and they have access to magic and all these other secret privileges that come with that. So I feel empathy for them to some extent, but it feels hollow to me because at the end of the day, they just have significant privilege. That's why I'm saying it's complicated. I'm enjoying it very much on a surface level. The aesthetic, the vibes, it's all hitting me in the right places, but I'm definitely also critical of some parts of the story. So we'll see how it ends. Obviously, I'll keep you posted. But besides that, I'm really just giving myself the freedom to mood read whatever I feel like I need to read or want to read in this moment. So we'll see whatever that turns out to be in real time. We'll see what happens. What I'm going to do right now, though, is go make some lunch, and I would like to watch a movie. I would really like to watch Kristen Stewart's latest oceanic horror movie that I can't remember the name of no matter how many times I try. I don't know if this is going to be the kind of vlog where we have a ton of B-roll footage, but realistically, the next time I will check in to tell you what my thoughts are on my reading will be tomorrow afternoon, most likely because of work and sleep and all that good stuff. So I'll see you then. So it's currently Monday around 2 in the afternoon, and surprising even myself, I have finished Ninth House. Honestly, I'm still buffering. I still need time to fully process, but overall, I think this is definitely like a solid 3.5 stars. If I was rating it purely on plot, as in like what's actually happening to move the story forward and the mystery and how all the pieces come together, it would be like a solid 4, maybe slightly above a 4 stars. But I do still have complicated feelings about it because there's definitely little problematic parts that I take issue with and that I definitely am critical of in a lot of ways. One thing I will say is, holy misogyny, Batman. There is a hell of a lot of violence against women in this story. It's emblematic to some extent because in some ways it's commenting on the pervasiveness of violence against women, but at the same time, at what point does it stop being about discussing and contextualizing violence against women and just become a perpetuation of violence against women? It is, to me, borderline gratuitous. And this is not a spoiler vlog, so I'm not going to give anything away, but there's also a twist towards the end that almost kind of undermines that commentary. So I wasn't entirely pleased about that. And one of the things I mentioned yesterday as one of the stronger parts of the story was that nested storytelling, especially when it came to the mystery elements of the story. And I think that was really strong, but I think it was a bit disappointing when it came to the actual reveals. It's not that what was being revealed wasn't interesting or compelling or didn't make sense. It actually made a lot of sense, and it was satisfying to finally see all these disparate puzzle pieces finally slot into place. But I felt like I was being told about all of these connections that Alex is discovering rather than having to contend with them and discover them for myself, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of things that were eventually revealed were not revealed through action or because something happened, but rather because something clicked into place for Alex. And then she was seeing how the dominoes fell in a certain way. And then she would just say the thing that she realized. I think towards the end, it does get closer to what I was hoping the story would be, which is a critique of this unchecked power and privilege and prestige that just runs rampant within these secret magical societies, and the ramifications of that, and what Alex's role in maintaining that status quo is as a member of Leith. I feel like we're kind of getting there towards the end. For me, I wanted it to go a bit further than it did. I wanted it to be a little more bold in its stance, but hopefully that's something we see continuing to evolve throughout the series. And like I was talking about yesterday, the story does have these random, like, problematic throwaway lines that it uses to try to be edgy, and overall, my opinion on that did not change. So I guess the takeaway is that, yes, I did very much enjoy this story overall. I was fully invested from start to finish, but that enjoyment comes with a very clear asterisk because I have very complicated feelings about a lot of parts of this story, and I think it could have been done better in so many ways. So those are just some of my thoughts fresh after reading Ninth House. And like I said, this was 3.5 stars for me. Another quick reading update. This morning when I was eating breakfast, I decided to start, or rather continue, The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka Older. I had read a few pages of this a couple of weeks ago, so I was just continuing on this morning as I was eating breakfast. As I said, I got a couple of chapters under my belt, and now I'm fully all in. I'm ready to continue. And honestly, the first couple of chapters are just Masa and Bleiti being so incredibly domestic, and it made my heart so incredibly happy to read. So this one's a little over 200 pages. It's 206 pages, and I'm currently on page 25. I'm not going to sit down and knock this one out today because I'm very tired and I have other things to do, but I don't anticipate this one taking more than maybe 2 or 3 days at most. What I'm going to do right now actually is work on some quote graphics for the book Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Y. Davis. It's a book I read very recently, and that's just what I'm choosing to do with my Bookstagram platform specifically right now, is to help share more information about these books that I'm reading to educate myself about the settler colonial occupation of Palestine by the settler colony of Israel, and also to help continue raise awareness about why we should be fighting for Palestine liberation and an end to this genocide and ethnic cleansing. I think it's a really great starting point. It's a really great primer, and it's a great pathway into these conversations, especially if you're starting from point zero and know absolutely nothing. It's a great overview of everything and why this is an important issue and the necessity of looking at this issue from an intersectional lens and not just in terms of like compounding different identities on top of each other, but also looking at these issues from a global perspective and connecting some of the civil rights and liberty issues that we face here in the United States and in other Western parts of the world with things happening in like Palestine, for instance. And it's about learning to see the connections between those different liberation movements and why all of those fights are the same fight. So I'm going to work on those graphics for a little bit right now, and I will also read more of this later, and I will keep you posted. All right, so it's currently Tuesday afternoon, close to 3 p.m., and I did read a little bit more of The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles, and I would like to share some thoughts. I realized I hadn't given a proper synopsis for this yet, so I should probably do that. I think I've said this part before, but it's basically like a cozy queer romance, but also a sci-fi murder mystery series set in space. We're following two main characters, Masa and Bleiti, and they live in a futuristic version of the world where we as humans have destroyed the Earth, unsurprisingly, and so now humanity has moved on to colonize space. Specifically, what's left of humankind has settled on the planet of Jupiter, so that's where the story is set. The story takes place after humankind has settled in. They've been there for quite some time. They've adapted to this new way of life. And like I said, Masa is an investigator, and Bleiti is a scholar who works for one of the universities. In the first book, they were former flames, shall we say, but they were brought together because of a case. In this sequel, they are officially back together, and they're also facing a new case when there are 17 students and scholars who have suddenly gone missing without a trace. There doesn't seem to be a pattern among these missing people. They don't know how or if they're connected or what the bigger picture is, and that's basically what the story is about. Both of them are working together to try and figure out this case. I love this so much. Like I said, I think cozy is the perfect word to encapsulate the way this series feels because, yes, there is a murder mystery happening in the background, but there's also this like intimacy, this closeness between Masa and Bleiti that's just so soft and so domestic and so welcoming, and it just wraps you up and it feels so good to read. I've said this before, but one of the ways that they show care for each other is through food, through making sure the other person rests and eats and resets themselves. And so like anytime these two are together, there's going to be tea, there's going to be snacks, there's going to be food. And I love that for them. And I think I said this in the other update, but they are so freaking cute together. It's making me so happy to read about them because they're at that stage in their relationship where they very obviously love each other. You can tell as the reader how strongly they feel for the other person, but they're not at a point yet where they can like freely express how much they care about the other person without needing some kind of excuse. It's an interesting dynamic because obviously they had a relationship before when they were much younger, but then obviously they broke up, they grew apart from each other, they went on different paths, but now they've made their way back to each other. And even though this isn't something new for them, it's still new territory in a sense. I was talking to some friends about it earlier, and the way I described it is that this story still very much has a sense of gay panic, which is a good thing. Like the first story also had gay panic, but it was a very different kind. In the first book, it's very much like, oh my God, I'm feeling these feelings again. Does this person feel the same way about me? Is it all in my head? We did this once. Can we do it again? Should we do it again? That was the kind of gay panic. In this one, it's like both of them realizing how deeply they care for the other person and almost being scared by how deeply they feel for the other person and not knowing whether the other one feels the same things to the same extent as they do, but more importantly also, what are their needs? What are their boundaries? What are they ready for? What are they not? And are they on the same page in that sense? There's also some added tension because they're officially working on this case together, like in an official legal capacity in a way that's actually sanctioned by both the investigators and the university. So that adds another layer to things. Like, are they bringing their work too much into their relationship? Another interesting thing is that we're kind of slowly being introduced to some of the socioeconomic disparities that still exist between humankind, even though they're on this completely new planet. As part of this investigation, they're traveling to one of Jupiter's moons, which just so happens to be where Massa grew up, and we're learning about how there's some disparity between people raised on Jupiter's moons and on Jupiter proper. I find it fascinating. And what I really appreciate is that Malka Older is engaging this idea that even if you remove humanity from the context, the social context of Earth, and have them start over somewhere completely new with a completely new slate, they will still bring their biases along and they will still find ways to initiate oppressive, divisive systems. So I'm really interested to see if that's a bigger picture in this story and if that's something that maybe connects these disappearances. It's good, it's fun, it's queer, it's compelling. I cannot wait to continue reading this. I'm currently about 70 pages in, again, out of 206 total, so I think I could finish this fairly soon. In fact, I don't really have any plans for the rest of the afternoon, so I might just like go downstairs and just sit down and indulge. So it's currently Wednesday around 2:30 in the afternoon. I haven't gotten too much further into the imposition of unnecessary obstacles, but I am currently 113 pages in, so definitely over the halfway mark. And I have to say, fully invested because I just got to a juicy break in the case. So excited to continue on with this, not too much to update you on at this point. I will say, I think what I find so especially endearing about Massa and Bleity's relationship is the fact that they're so tentative around each other because it's this second chance romance and they don't want to screw it up. So they don't really know what the other person is feeling and they're too afraid to ask. I'm really tired, so I might not be expressing myself to the best of my ability because that might sound like a weird thing to find endearing. But what's so funny to me about it is that it reminds me of those memes where one person's like, babe, do you just like me or do you like me? And the other person's like, honey, we're literally married. Even that might sound a little silly because obviously these characters aren't married to each other, but they're literally in a committed adult relationship with each other. And that fact is really hard for either of them to register. And I just think it's really sweet that they care so much about each other, but they still don't seem to know where the other person stands. So I think I'm going to finish this either tonight or tomorrow morning at latest. And then once I finish up, I will give my final thoughts, and that will be where this vlog ends. In the interim, though, I have read and also started a couple of other things. So today I read the entirety, or rather listened to the entirety, of a short story called Mother Country by Etaf Rum. Unfortunately, this is, as you can see from the cover, a Bezos exclusive product, and far be it from me to actively platform, promote, and share anything that exists solely behind a paywall, especially when it's something that could be a great resource for a lot of people, like I believe this story is. But there is a slight silver lining in the sense that this is part of the Kindle Unlimited program. So if you subscribe to that program, you can either read it for free, or if you don't subscribe to that program, you can get it at a pretty significant discount. I think it's like $1. It's hard because I personally try not to use Amazon unless it's absolutely necessary. And again, because this story only exists behind their paywall, it was necessary. This is classified as a story, but really it's more like a novella, and it's written by a Palestinian diasporic author, I believe. You may have heard of Etaf Rum in other contexts. She has written, I believe it's called A Woman Is No Man, and more likely you may have heard of her other book, Evil Eye, which is her most recent release. Mother Country, like I said, is a novella-length piece of work, and it's about this Palestinian-American woman who is journeying back home after being estranged from her family for several years because of choices that she made that they did not agree with. And as she's traveling back home, she's sort of ruminating on the past, and the story is framed as if she's sort of addressing her mother in retrospect and explaining why she made the choices she made, and how all of those things started with her marriage to her husband, and how that affected her mental health, her well-being, her life, and all of that stuff. It's a very short but incredibly powerful story that explores things like mental illness, neglect, family dynamics within immigrant families, intergenerational trauma, and all of those things. And what's really interesting about it is that you would think at first glance that this story about a Palestinian diasporic character is not as relevant to the current events that we're seeing unfolding in Qasset. But actually, it is incredibly relevant because the story is very openly exploring the urgency and the necessity of liberation, and also all the different forms that liberation can take. In this specific instance, we're really exploring how the main character wants liberation from this sort of patriarchal system that she's been forced into by her family, by her culture, because that's just the way things have always been done. And it's definitely exploring that sort of immigrant mentality of older generations being like, well, I suffered and I endured through all these things, so you should also be able to suffer and endure as well. And even though the story is just following one individual as they're trying to articulate their mental illness, something that's been denied to them their entire life, and trying to escape this toxic marriage, better themselves, live a better life, it is directly linked to the events we see unfolding in the occupation of Palestine, in that same sentiment as there's more to life than just surviving, than just getting by. We deserve happiness, we deserve joy, safety, healthiness, and the opportunity to live. It's really great. I gave it 4.5 stars just because, some of the characterization is a little bit stinted by the brevity, but that's really not saying much. It was phenomenal all around, and I definitely want to read more from Etaf Rum. I actually requested her book, Evil Eye, before October even began, so hopefully I will eventually get that and be able to read it. And in that same vein, I also started listening to Minor Detail as well. In case you don't know the full context behind this book, it's also written by a Palestinian author, and it deals directly with the suffering, the genocidal violence, and the occupational violence that Palestinian people are facing at the hands of Israeli settler colonists. And it was supposed to be honored this year at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which, for those of you who don't know, is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, international gathering of publishers and publishing professionals. So it's a very big deal. And the fact that they were going to platform this Palestinian author and give her a chance to share her voice and share the experience of what Palestinian people are going through could have had a huge impact. But of course, once the settler colony of Israel stepped up their genocidal tactics and declared this so-called war. It's not a war because it's not even on both sides, but their war on Palestine, then they revoked her event and they canceled her event. So the story is set in Palestine, and the first part is actually told from the perspective of an Israeli soldier who's in the IOF. And I'm using my words very intentionally because the settler colony of Israel wants you to refer to them as the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, but they're actually the IOF, the Israeli Occupational Forces. So the story starts from his perspective, and he's learning about these quote-unquote defense tactics, and he actually ends up being involved in the gang raping of a young Palestinian woman. And that's just a usual thing for him. It has no lasting impact on his life. He just goes on his merry way afterwards, which is where the title of the story comes from, because what she experienced, even though it was horrific, was just considered to be a minor detail in the greater landscape of history. And then the second part of the story is told from the perspective of a woman. I think she's Palestinian American, and I'm not sure if she's a historian or scholar or something of that nature, but she learns about what happened to this woman, and she becomes obsessed with learning everything she can about it. So that's the general setup of the story, and I'm only a couple of chapters in at this point, so there's not much to say, but I can say that the writing in this story is incredible. I really appreciate the symmetry of the title of the story and the storytelling methods that the author is employing. She's really focusing on these unexpected details that you wouldn't consider at first glance, but they're so strong and they're so pervasive that they really reveal an incredible amount about the characters. So I know this one is going to be a difficult read. I know it's going to go to some incredibly dark and horrific places and deal with some really horrible things. I know that going into it, but I don't think that makes it any less worth reading. In fact, I think that makes it even more necessary to read during this time. So I'm not going to say I'm enjoying it because that's the wrong way to phrase that, but I am curious to see how the rest of the story unfolds. Because of that, I'm going to take my time with it. I'm not going to push myself to rush through it just to fit it into this vlog. Like I said, my main priority right now is just finishing the imposition of unnecessary obstacles. But if I do get a chance to listen to more of Minor Detail, I will, of course, update you on more of my thoughts next time I check in. Hello, it's about 11 a.m. on Thursday morning, and as promised, I did in fact finish The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles by Malka Older, and it was fantastic. I just had so much fun reading this. I love everything this novella series is doing. I love that both books in this series so far are definitely these self-contained mysteries. They have these self-contained, fully completed storylines, but they definitely have connective tissue that could potentially lead to something much bigger later on in the series. I think the reason why this is such a successful second book is because it has everything you love from the first book, from the relationship dynamic to the tone, the humor, the mystery element, the setting, all of that stuff. But it's also its own kind of mystery. It feels very distinct from the first book in that sense. It's a different flavor of mystery, if that makes sense, and I enjoyed it very much. In fact, even though I gave this book the same rating, I believe, as the first book, which is 4.5 stars, I think I love the way this book made me feel even more than the first. Another thing I really love about what Malka Older is doing with this novella series is that she always has this beautiful symmetry between the title of the story and how that ties into both the mystery that's unfolding and also the interpersonal relationship dynamics. In the first book, The Mimicking of Known Successes referred both to how the people on Jupiter are trying to sort of discover and research ways that they can recreate the successes of Earth on a different planet. But it's also how Massa and Pleiti, as they're rediscovering this romantic relationship that they once had, are also trying to mimic the ways that they were successful in their relationship, but in a completely new context. I don't know if any of that made sense, but those were certainly words. And in this one, The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles at once again refers to this sort of dynamic of humankind trying to live and develop a new way of life on Jupiter, and how sometimes they make things harder for themselves than they necessarily have to be. And it also reflects in Massa and Pleiti's relationship when they have these
obstacles, especially communication obstacles, that they don't necessarily need to have in place, but because they're being so cautious about this second chance romance, they're putting those obstacles in place even though they don't have to. So in both stories so far, it's been really satisfying to see how those themes play out in two very different ways. I think another part of what makes this series so enjoyable for me personally to read is the fact that it is so Holmesian in nature, and that doesn't only refer to the relationship dynamic between Masa and Blethi as Sherlock and Watson-esque, but also in the way this story is written, the way it's told, the way it's structured, the word choices, the language, the sense of humor. It feels antiquated almost, even though it's very futuristic, and it definitely feels reminiscent of something that Arthur Conan Doyle would have actually written himself, which is wild to say because he never would have written anything like this. I love that about it. It's futuristic sci-fi. It's pushing the envelope on like the boundaries of what humans can do and really imagining in a very logistic sense what living on Jupiter would look like, but it also feels and reads like a classic. It's charming, it's delightful, it's sapphic, it's romantic, it's everything I want in life, and I just really enjoyed it. I will say I think the ending is slightly anticlimactic in a sense, which is not to say that what we learn is unsatisfying, but that like the first book is leading towards a more action-packed confrontation, which is stereotypical of these kinds of murder mysteries where a detective or investigator is involved. But this one doesn't have that, which is fine. But I also think the pacing was a little bit strange towards the end because it kind of feels like we're in the falling action in the last couple of chapters, and then within literally the last 5 or 6 pages, we get hit with a pretty quick confrontation and then a quick resolution, and then the story is over. So it did feel a little bit hasty in that sense. But besides that, there's really nothing about this book I didn't love. It was exactly what I needed to read right now. It was so much fun. I loved it so much. And I cannot wait for there to be more installments in this series. So that's going to bring us to the end of our vlog here. I hope you've enjoyed watching. It's been a pretty good few days. I finished Ninth House, I finished Mother Country, I finished The Imposition of Unnecessary Obstacles, and I got a pretty good start on Minor Detail as well, which I will continue after this. So all in all, I'd say it's been a pretty good 5 days. If you have thoughts on any of the books I read in this video, feel free to drop those down below in the comments, or feel free to share what you've been reading these days. But that is everything. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing well, and until next time, I'll see you later.